All right, welcome Laura to the podcast. I am so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Donna. It's a pleasure to be here
Thank you.
virtually.
Virtually, that's right. We're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, but I was going to say I met Laura at NAMM. I did, but we were just talking before. I was a big fan of Diva, the big band, and I saw an amazing Diva big band concert at the Blue Note in New York in the mid 90s. I brought a bunch of my friends, and we were just blown away. Not just the quality of the big band, they were just incredible, but as a woman musician, and we're talking 1990s, it's not like we're in the 1950s, but even in the 1990s, it was such a big deal for me and for, my friends who are also musicians and just other female musicians to see, such an incredible group of female musicians that were not only just playing charts, but they were they were playing rip-roaring solos and really just pushing the limits with jazz and jazz improvisation. So it's so cool for me to interview you here live, and I do want to talk about Diva, as we get talking in a second. So this is awesome for me too.
Well, I'm so excited to know that somebody was there and saw that, and it made such an impression on you. It was fun for us too. I have really great memories of playing at Diva, and I know we played at the Blue Note a couple of times. We played there with Jack Jones, and we also played there backing up Diane Shure. Do you remember which one it was?
Diane Shure.
Okay, yeah, that was super fun. Yeah, she's hysterical too.
that was an amazing gig. I mean, just the energy in the room. Great venue too. Blue Note was really awesome as well. I could picture it. I could actually just see it. We were seated where we saw you and all the performers, and yes, it absolutely made an impression. It made an impression. We're talking, oh my gosh, we're talking more than 25 years ago. Oh, yikes. It's good though.
It feels like yesterday.
It does, because I still have that vivid memory. And you know what? While we're on the topic of Diva, you were one of the co-founders. Can you talk about what the vision was for co-founding Diva, what the goals were and stuff?
I wasn't really a co-founder. I was just one of the original members.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So it wasn't really my idea or my concept. I just went to the very first audition, and I got in the first saxophone section. And but definitely as time progressed, the band took on it sort of developed its own sound based on the players that were in that original band. So that was kind of interesting and really cool for me to sort of see that emerge.
Yeah, and when I think about it, if I remember right, in that it's not really a first iteration, but Ingrid Jensen was there, right, on trumpet.
Yep. Liesl Whitaker also.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then Virginia Mayhew.
Yep. And Sue Terry and
Claire Daly.
And Carol Chaikin also.
Yeah, that's right. And all these incredible women, are out there with successful careers right now, which is really, really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So what was it, you said it was a great experience. First couple of gigs that you all did, what was that experience like? Did you get get great feedback? Did you get any resistance? Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, I was already a veteran of playing in all-female bands at that point. I think I went to Berkeley, so I remember doing a few all-female band projects when I was at Berkeley. And also I'm from the Bay Area, so between Berkeley and moving to New York, I also lived in the Bay Area for a year after college, and then just tried to get some playing experience before moving to New York. And I played in a few all-female bands there, and some of the musicians I met in those bands were awesome. When I first moved to New York, I also, because there were so few female musicians, I used to get calls for all-female bands all the time. All-female club date bands, all-female big bands, all female, whatever, Latin bands, you know, they would be like, oh, call Laura, she's a female. So I played in some good ones. I played in some not so good ones. So when I first started playing in Diva, I was, you know, I could tell right away that they were looking for really, really good musicians. It wasn't like a novelty act where you had to like dress up and more about how you look or, you know, how, you know, the sex appeal aspect. It was really a more serious band. So I was really pleased about that. And at the beginning, Stanley Kay, who was the founder, the real founder, he wanted to make it sort of like more like the International Sweethearts of Rhythm, where you had a front person that was a singer out front. So those original gigs, we tried that. And the singer that Stanley used was, you know, a great performer, great singer, but she was kind of more on the Broadway side of things. And so it wasn't quite as jazzy and loose, but that idea didn't really take off. And so eventually, like what you saw was kind of like, that was kind of my favorite period of time for the time period that I was in the band.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up an important point that most women know, but maybe most men don't realize, is that, you know, we have to deal with feedback or, you know, resistance in the sense of, oh, you know, you need to have this sex appeal or you need to look a certain way. It's not about, you know, what you're offering musically. We have to think about these other types of things. And, you know, looking back to from the 90s, but also to today, I'm hoping that that has gotten better. I mean, in some ways it hasn't. I know I had shared something personally with you before we recorded here, but in your own experience, has that aspect gotten better?
Well, so because I'm not 25 anymore, I might not get those same calls, you know. I noticed, you know, I don't know. I've noticed that there are a lot more young female saxophone players that are really serious and killing. And, you know, it's more like, I think what's different now is if you want to express yourself that way and look cute and wear makeup and get all glammed up, that's your choice. And if you don't want to, that's your choice too. And I think that's what's different. Like, I mean, I don't mind getting dressed up. I like to get dressed up for my gig. I like to, you know, choose my look and stuff. But I think the difference is I don't have somebody telling me, you know, no glasses allowed, or you must wear nail polish, or you can only wear high heel shoes. Like, I'll just pick my own look. And I think there's a lot more spectrum. And, you know, I mean, obviously, like some certain types of acts, like more the smooth jazz kind of acts, I see a lot of like really sexy looking women like marketing themselves as like sex appeal, like in the way that a pop star might do the same thing. And you know, but that's okay as long as they're cool with it, you know.
As long as you said an important thing, as long as they have the choice as opposed to being dictated to them.
Sure, yeah.
That's actually huge when you think about it. And I know, again, some people listening may be like, what, are you kidding me? But no, this is real stuff. This is real stuff that, you know, we've gone through, and that, you know, you've gone through more than myself as well. And what's really awesome too, and you just said it before, man, there's some really great younger female players that really are killing it, like Melissa Aldana, right? Camille Thurman, you know?
Yeah.
Really groundbreaking stuff happening there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, just because you are a really serious player doesn't mean you want to look like a sack of potatoes, or, you know. I mean, I see fashion as a way to express yourself creatively, but if you want to, in whatever way you want, you know.
Right, that's true. And you know, the funny thing is, I'm thinking about it, there's some great younger guys out there, and it's funny, Leo P., he's a great player. He is the humblest of all people, folks. When I interviewed him at NAMM, I was like, wow. And he has his look, and it's really flashy, it's pretty cool, but that's his thing, you know. So
sure.
I think it's good that the guys are embracing that too, you know. And it's actually, he's this really nice, humble guy, very great player, and he's embracing this like really outlandish type of clothing and act and all that kind of thing. I think it's a nice change compared to, you know, 20, 25 years ago when the record companies or the venues dictated, or your managers dictated what you should be doing.
Yeah, well, that also brings up another interesting point, if I can sort of segue for a minute into a little anecdote. So when I first moved to New York, I literally was maybe one of two or three female saxophone, I maybe knew four female saxophone players in New York, but I was kind of like, I felt a little lonely. I didn't have any, like, it was more, I played in groups with guys. And then, but at that time, most of the guys, that was right around the time that Wynton Marsalis sort of came into his, you know, power and sort of instigated the Armani suit look for the young lions and stuff. And I really didn't know how to deal with that. I was like, well, what am I supposed to wear? I'm not going to wear an Armani suit. And, you know, obviously not, I don't have that look anyway. So I remember seeing a couple of women like show up to gigs wearing like ball gowns and stuff. And I was like, that's really ridiculous. So it took me a little bit of time to sort of like figure out like how I was going to like present myself. Like I didn't want to look cheesy, or I didn't want to just, you know what I mean? But I wanted to look nice, but I couldn't really figure out how to deal with the young lions and the Armani suits and what a woman would do in that situation, you know?
This is actually, I'm so glad that, you know, I love going off topic because it's great. No, because this is cool, because this is where, you know, the real interesting stuff comes. And my first thought was thinking how, you know, the thoughts that were going through your head, fashion is important because, yes, you are, you know, you are a product. You know, you're playing, your music, it's a product, but people are attracted to what they see. And again, you don't have to be, you know, like this it doesn't have to be the sex appeal thing. We're not talking that. But how do you decide on your look, your fashion?
Yeah.
How did you decide for you? Did you have help from anybody, or did you just, you know, just eventually come up with your look?
Well, I think what happened was I just played around with a lot of different things. And then when I started getting into more like Brazilian music, and before I got into Brazilian music, I had a fusion band, and I sort of deviated away from straight ahead jazz, and that gave me more of the freedom to experiment with fashion and in what I wanted to wear. And then getting into Brazilian music, like Brazilian women are very comfortable looking sexy, but they're not necessarily I don't know, selling their, yeah. And I really liked that, you know, kind of like tropical vibe and just being comfortable with your own body and your own look and stuff. So that's, you know, getting away from straight ahead jazz for a period of time sort of helped me find what I was looking for.
Interesting. We're definitely going to be exploring the Brazilian jazz without a doubt. So you know what? Now let me bring it totally in a different direction. I want to bring it back to the music, and I want to start from the very beginning. Okay, so what was your first instrument? When did you start, and when did you start playing saxophones and all that kind of thing?
Well, my first instrument was piano, and I lasted about 6 months with my teacher because I just didn't get the reading thing, because I could play by ear really well. So because I had some background, I was able to just kind of pick up what my friends were doing in their piano lessons and play it back to them, which really made them mad because they were like, I worked on this for 6 months and it took you 2 days to get this, you know? And then I started on flute when I was 9. And again, I couldn't read music. I just kind of faked it. And then when I was 12 and I got into junior high school, the band director sort of discovered what had happened, and he set me back from the very beginning and gave me a book and made me read whole notes, and then I got it, you know. But I just needed somebody to sort of backtrack. It's like when you miss a problem in math and then the math teacher starts, or algebra starts going ahead, and you just didn't get that first fundamental. So you're just completely out of it. But I was too scared to tell anybody. I just felt so humiliated that I couldn't read. So this teacher discovered what was going on. And then I became really successful at it. And he asked me if I would like to try the saxophone next year. And I was like, it sounds really like a heavy instrument. And I hate carrying stuff around. I really do. I mean, the flute was a good choice because it's very portable. But then I thought, but it is really loud. And that's good. And so I said, sure, sign me up. So he gave me a C melody saxophone to sort of teach myself how to play over the summer. He gave me a book and a C melody to borrow.
That's interesting. That's interesting and different. And he would even have a C melody saxophone. I'm shocked.
Yeah. No, it was kind of because they didn't use it in the band program, but it just happened to be there from previous years. So, so I did that, and then I came back, and then I remember the first moment I sat in the sax section. I was playing tenor, and it was mostly all girls. There was one guy playing Barry, but all the other people in the sax section were all women. And I felt really powerful. I was like, awesome, you know, this completely rocks. And I owned it. And I was like, this is my instrument. I'm into it. And I liked that it was like women too, but it was like strong women, like really like, you know, with loud, boisterous personalities. And I did feel like I fit in more. So, yeah, so that's kind of how I started playing saxophone.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh. And I'm going to digress a little bit. You know what's really interesting, and I don't know if you see this as an advantage now, or at least I hope you will after I say this, but the fact that you were able to play by ear to start with was a huge advantage, because the thing is that I'm a music learning theory certified. So Dr. Edwin Gordon founded Music Learning Theory Concepts and Ideas and Strategies. He was a bassist for Gene Krupa, and he studied how people learn music. And really, ideally, just the way you learn language, you learn by ear first. You know, people talk to you. They babble to you. You babble back. They say words. You say little words back. They say short phrases. You say that back. You don't start looking at a book until you're maybe 4 or 5 years old, you know, depending on your parents.
Sure.
In music, the big thing was, and I know this for myself, read and play at the same time, you know, and a lot of people fall off the wagon because they can't do the reading part. They could do the playing part, and if they were taught by ear, we'd probably have a lot more people playing instruments today to start with. So a huge advantage, because I know for myself, being classically trained, you know, it was harder to learn the ear thing, because the ear training, all that kind of stuff never really gets taught as much as the reading does in school. The thinking is that it's easier to teach a person how to read, and reading is literacy, when it's really not. It's the improvisation is the extreme literacy. And, you know, having that a strong ear, you could probably say really helped you later on when you started to learn how to improvise.
Well, it's probably one of the reasons that I thought I would give jazz, you know, a try, because I thought, well, I can hear and play back things pretty well, so maybe I would be good at this, you know?
Yeah, definitely. When did you start getting exposed to jazz?
Well, I mean, I sort of had jazz in my background because I grew up with a player piano, so I grew up listening to like ragtime and stuff like that. Songs from 1915. But in our school system in the Bay Area, we had a really strong music program, and there were, you know, different levels of jazz bands. And I would hear the kids from the high school jazz band, they'd come, you know, do concerts and stuff. And I remember listening to this one guy playing, and tears started coming out of my eyes. Like, he was playing tenor sax, and I was like, this is so moving. I want to do this, you know, this is where I want to be. So I got into the jazz band in high school, and there was one summer where, I mean, I kind of felt, because I didn't improvise, and the people that could would just kind of leave me out, and they'd start talking about all these concepts, and, you know, just obviously Laura wouldn't understand that. And I just remember thinking, okay, you know what? I am going to learn how to improvise. And so I locked myself in my bedroom one summer and practiced for like five hours a day, just playing along with records. I just wanted to see, let me just see what this is about. So I put on like a lot of modal records, like one chord, like funk jams and stuff. And I figured out like a couple of pentatonic scales and just got a little flow happening. So then when I went back the next semester, I was just like fooling around, and they were like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of learned to play a little bit." And so, so then they started giving me solos, and so we went to our high school went to the Chaffey College Jazz Festival, and it happened to be on my birthday. And when we were at the Oakland airport, we ran into Tower of Power at the airport, and I was like, okay, this is a sign from the universe. So I went to the Chaffey College Jazz Festival, and I ended up winning an Outstanding Soloist Award, and I won a scholarship to the Jamie Aebersold clinics. And so I'd never had a teacher before, so I went to the Jamie Aebersold clinics, and that's really where I was like, oh, okay, jazz isn't just jamming on D minor 7, like, what the heck? So that's when I met my first teacher. His name was Hal Stein. He was a teacher at the Jamie Aebersold clinics, and so I started studying with him.
You actually just answered one of my questions. I was wondering if you had any guidance in high school, private teachers and that kind of thing. So what a way to, get started with good teachers. So you started taking lessons with Hal, and you took the summer camp, which was probably a life-changing experience for
Oh
you.
my God. Yeah. I mean, I'm still friends to this day with the people I met there and the teachers that I met there,
Absolutely.
It was life-changing.
Absolutely. So then after that, then what happened? You went to the camp. What grade were you in? Were you a senior at that point, or?
No, I was probably I think I was a 16 or 17 when I went to the camp. And then so I started studying with Hal, and then Hal was really like old school New York, great player, and he just like said, you got to get the Charlie Parker Omnibook, and so I got that, and I started, just playing with the play along records and stuff. And Hal used to play in clubs and stuff. He played at the Keystone Corner once, and he invited me to like do the door, and I used to go hear him play, and then. So there was a jam session on Saturday afternoons at the Keystone Corner, and I remember hearing about it on the radio, and I was like, I'm going to that jam session. So I sort of got a couple of my friends. Do you know Ann King?
No, I don't.
She's a trumpet player in LA. Her name
wait, I'm
used to
sorry.
be,
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
So I asked Ann if she would go, and then another guy, and we all went to the Keystone Corner jam session, and I signed my name up to sit in, and they called me up on stage, and I was nervous and shaking, but I played, and everybody applauded, and I was like, this is awesome. I'm totally coming back. So I started going there, and I met people that are my friends to this day. Like Jeff Beal used to go, and Bob Kenmotsu, Kitty Margolis, just so many people, like, kind of around my age that lived in the Bay Area. And then I remember like, I was like, well, how do you learn tunes? And they were, somebody said, well, you need a fake book. And so I said, well, how do you get one? And, well, they're illegal, so you have to like get it, on the sly. And then I remember this woman like walks in with a shopping cart full of fake books. And she was like, does anybody need a fake book? Wow. So I said, I do. And how much are they? And she's like, they're $15. And I said, well, I don't have the money, but you could send me a check when you get home, and I'll just give you a book. So I was like, okay. So my mom wrote a check and sent it to her. And the woman was Abby Scher, who at the time was the wife of Chuck Scher, who later started Scher Publishing Company. So yeah, so I still have my first fake book, and then I just started like learning tunes out of it, and I realized I wanted to learn how to read chords on the piano. So I took some piano lessons when I was in high school too, just because I wanted to know what all that stuff meant. What's a sharp 5? What's a sharp 11? How do I voice chords? And so, yeah.
This is so interesting because you're describing, you're self-taught in a sense. Yes, you took some lessons from Hal Stein, but it's when you needed to learn something, you figured it out on your own. And it's very interesting how you're doing this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a real DIY person. I like to do stuff on my own. You know, I'm still like that with everything. So I think education is really important and great too. And I mean, I think also just because I didn't, you know, I wasn't one of those people whose parents like signed me up for a private teacher coming over to the house and this and that. Like they were more like trying to save money. So I did it on my own.
Mine too. I get you on that one. You know, it's really funny. Some people may not realize that fake books, yeah, they were illegal, and that there were tons of mistakes in the early ones.
Oh my gosh.
Which volume of, well, I mean, there's also many volumes of the fake books too. I think the most current one is volume 6 of the you know, the legal ones that are out there, the real books and stuff like that, fake book, real book. But you probably didn't have like the first iteration of fake books. You're probably maybe closer to when they were allowed to be published, I'm thinking.
No, not really.
Oh.
My first fake book was like a hodgepodge of many different fake books that were all put together in one. So you can see like different, some of them are from probably the first real book, and some of them are from other books, and some of them were just things that people had written out by hand and stuck in there. So it's a kind of a weird combination of tunes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me ask you this too. So you had this fake book. What was your approach to learning the tunes? I mean, you know, were you looking for, I don't remember I've got some of those illegal fake books too, but did they list the recording that
No.
No, so you had to find it.
No, well, so what I did was I went to these not only did I go to the Keystone Corner jam session, but once I got my confidence a little stronger, I went to every jam session. If it was a jam session, I would be there. And I had a little notepad, and I would take notes about what the songs people were playing. And then I would try to learn them. And if I needed to go get the record of it or whatever, I would try to find the recording. And so I sort of created a repertoire list for myself. I actually created, because I couldn't really transpose yet, I actually would transpose by hand all the songs and make my own little book so I could read in B flat. And then I'm always telling my students to do that too, like not the transposing thing, but just keep a list. Keep a list when you hear somebody playing a song, because you know you want to at least have 20 or 30 songs that you don't have to read, where if you show up to a jam session, what are you going to play? You know, nobody wants to see your I reel B on stage, you know, just memorize like 10 or 20 songs. So that's what I did. And then obviously when I went to Berkeley, real books were being sold on the street corners there. So
it's so cool. Let me ask you this question. What can you give, like, how do I want to word? Can you give a tip to people who may be self-taught, you know, how to learn a tune today? I mean, gosh, yeah, we have YouTube, we have all these types of things, but
Sure.
What would you advise somebody today who may be self-taught, who's like, I want to learn tunes. What do I do?
Well, I mean, specifically for jazz, I would say listen to the definitive recordings, you know, first. Like I have students that they learn songs, and I said, well, have you ever heard the original recording of this? No. And I'm like, well, why not? It's so easy, you know. So if you're learning blue bossa, you know, Google that or look on YouTube and listen to Kenny Dorham, you know. And so I always advise that, and then listen to different versions of things too. There may be another version that you prefer. And then definitely, I mean, you have to break it down, try to memorize the head, and memorize the chord changes. And if you can't do that right away, wean yourself off of looking at the chord changes, you know, little by little. So you go play the roots, or see if you can just get it in your head, and then just take the chord changes away and just jump in there, you know, even if you make mistakes.
Right, because you
got to get it inside your head, you know.
Now, do you, for your students, do you have them, do you encourage them to learn the head by ear, or they have they have the fake book there, the real book there, and you know they were able to read it and kind of listen and then tweak it from there?
Both. I mean, encourage them to read it. And also, I mean, for the ones that are really motivated, I encourage them to transcribe, do a lot of transcribing. Not only transcribing melodies, but transcribing solos, transcribing just even little phrases that you want to learn and incorporate into your own playing. So I think transcribing is a really, really important tool for learning how to play jazz.
Yeah, and it also really, really develops your ears and helps you to internalize,
Yes,
not only
yes.
just melodies, but like phrasing and articulation and getting ideas with tone and stuff like that.
Totally, totally. And those things stay with you forever. Like anytime I hear a tune that I've transcribed a solo to, I could sing it back. I'm like, oh, it's great. I love that. So, you know,
That's cool. Now, and I don't know if this would change compared to when you were doing these jams, which, by the way, actually, these Keystone Corner jams, right? You were young, weren't you? Was there an age limit or?
no, because it was a Saturday afternoon and they served food there. So minors were allowed.
That's awesome because I don't know how much of that is available. We're talking the United States here, but also all over the world. That's the tricky thing. Jam sessions, finding jam sessions for high school age kids or younger.
Sure.
Where they're actually allowed to go in. So I was
Yeah.
curious about that. Let me ask you this question too. So back then, what were the most common tunes that were called, and is it the same today? So my question really is, what would you recommend? If you could name 5 tunes that you would recommend for people to definitely learn for jam sessions, what would they be?
Well, I mean, I remember the first tune I wrote down was Blue Bossa because I thought, oh, that's so pretty and it's like kind of easy to play. So that was one. And another one they used to play at Keystone all the time was Stolen Moments. I remember that one. But it's hard to say. I tell people have a couple of blues heads ready, like an F and B flat. So Now's the Time or Billy's Bounce, and have a rhythm changes, Oleo or Anthropology or something. Have some kind of a bossa nova or a Latin-ish tune. A standard like There Will Never Be Another You or something like that, just for some jazz standards. For Nika's Dream was a song they played a lot at Keystone. And they also had like some guys show up sometimes that wanted to play free jazz, and so they would just get on stage and start moving their fingers and squeaking and stuff, and I tried that a couple times, and I think it was pretty awful, on my part, and I just realized that wasn't my thing. But it was an interesting group of people that showed up there.
I've got to put this aside because you just reminded me of something. I was part of, I remember a man reached out to me and he was into that kind of free jazz type of thing. There was no head, nothing like that. He wouldn't even tell me the key. He'd just start playing and I'd be up there and like trying to, hear what's going on, get the groove, get the feel, get the mood of it. And then just it was a free form composition, and it was interesting. It was pretty cool. A little nerve-wracking. It wasn't just in one key because he would modulate and do all this other kind of crazy stuff. He was a great musician. Yeah, oh my gosh, that really reminded me of a very interesting memory, and it's actually an interesting experience too because that definitely opens up your ears. But what I wanted to ask you too, I don't know if you can answer this, but jam sessions on the West Coast versus the East Coast, and notice any differences?
Okay. Definitely the East Coast jam sessions, at least when I first moved to New York, there were just some heavy hitters, when I first moved to New York, there was this place called the Star Cafe. It was on 23rd Street. It was this hole in the wall. It smelled like crap. And then I walked in the door and there's like Junior Cook playing tenor, and Brian Lynch and Michael Weiss. I think Harold White was playing drums. He was the drummer with Horace Silver, and Ed Howard was playing bass. And people would go there, and Joe Lovano lived right across the street. So Joe Lovano would show up, Ralph LaLama would show up, Steve Grossman used to stop in there, and every other tenor sax player in the world would go and line up to play. And the poor rhythm section would have to listen to everybody play 10 choruses each of whatever. But it was like fast. It was like hard hitting. I wouldn't say competitive in the sense that people were trying to get a prize, but it was definitely sort of had this competitive vibe. Like you had to like hold your own in those sessions. So those were exciting, you know?
Wow. Now, let's talk about mindset for a second then. You know, you talked about your first jam session and you were really nervous, and then you're like, this is awesome, I love this. But can you give some tips about mindset? Because a lot of people are very afraid to go to jam sessions because they're afraid of being, you know, critiqued in a very negative way. What advice could you give there?
And they probably will be, you know, that's the thing. Like, I mean, I had fun, but I also had moments of humiliation where I remember I went there with this friend of mine to this one jam session, and I didn't play so well. And I remember sticking my head out the window of the car on the way home and screaming because I was so upset and I was so angry and so embarrassed. And, but I think that you do have to have sort of a courageous sense of adventure, you know, and you have to and another thing I learned too is how you experience a jam session is often dependent on who you're playing with. So if you get stuck with a kind of a weak rhythm section or maybe some not so good players, it may not be as fun because it's going to feel more difficult to play. And you kind of have to keep that in mind. Like there are jam sessions and then there are gigs, and jam sessions can be anything. It can be like 10 singers singing My Funny Valentine, you know, or it can be like great players that, you know, you really have a nice musical moment. So you kind of have to lower your expectations. And then I always tell my students too, like when you go to a jam session, you might want to go to the first jam session, you know, bring your instrument with you, but just observe it and see what it is and see what the level is and see what people are doing, see if people are nice, you know. There can be some real jerks, you know, that are, you know, and then you decide like if you feel comfortable playing. And if you don't have to, you know, or if you want to just observe one time and just kind of get the vibe, and then you might go home and go, okay, I can handle that, you know. And so just, it's so many different ways it can go at a public jam session, you know.
Absolutely, and it could be a humbling experience, but I guess also, you know, you've kind of alluded to it too. It's a learning experience as well.
Totally. And it's also such a great networking experience. I mean, I don't do it anymore, go to jam sessions, but when I first moved to New York, I was all the time going to jam sessions, meeting people would hear you and they'd call you for gigs. That's how you get work, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I interviewed Katja Riekerman, she said the same thing. So she's from Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and then she moved to Los Angeles, and she hit up every single jam session that she could. The Baked Potato, you know, had some really good jams, and she was talking about that's what really helped her. So it's good that you're absolutely reiterating that. Another question that I would have too, you know, like those standard tunes that you talked about, even others. When you went to jam sessions, would people play those tunes in the original keys, or would they throw you for a loop and, you know, say, oh, it's normally in C, let's do it in F sharp or something?
No, people would play it in the standard keys. The only time that you might have to play in a weird key is if a singer wants to do something in their key, you know.
Right.
So.
Right. That's always an adjustment. And so, you know, good advice too, if you're playing a song that has lyrics, you know, so if you're advising your students, let's say All the Things You Are, or All of Me, like those types of tunes, you know, do you have your students learn them in many keys, or?
I try to enforce that. Like, I am a big advocate of practicing everything in 12 keys. Every time I practice something in 12 keys. And I try to challenge myself and play ridiculously hard tunes in 12 keys. And I've been doing that for years and years and years. And with I Real B, it's so easy. You can just go through the entire cycle of 12 keys, and, you know, you can play it slow. If you need to look at it, you can. But yeah, I try to get them to do that. Most people are a little skittish about that. Like, it's hard. It's not easy, but again, you got to just jump in and do it. You have to make mistakes and be willing to flounder for a while, and then it becomes easier, you know?
Absolutely. And you know what? You just reminded me too. Some people may not know. Let me pull this up. You mean iReal Pro, right? So let me just let this load for a
Yeah,
second.
iReal Pro. I called it iReal B.
I think that's what it first came out as, right?
Yeah.
iReal B? Yeah, so iReal B is an app. You can get it on desktop for PC and for Mac, but you could also, you have to pay separate for the desktop version versus the mobile version. And just for people, I didn't get the first thing up here, but iReal B is basically, it's not the melodies, it's the chords, right? Unless,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't
No,
have
it's not the melodies. It's just the chords, and you can change the key. You can change the rhythmic feel. You can change the tempo. You can,
Yeah, just to give people just what it would
yeah.
look like. Yeah, it's just a chord sheet, basically. I know, those of you listening, you're like, I can't see anything. The video, we'll put the video for, the YouTube link in the show notes on saxophonepodcast.com, our site. But this is, it gives you the lead sheet, but not the melody. And you can set the tempo, you can set the groove for it, how many times you want to solo, you could change the key. If you're a guitarist, there's tabs there. It's really a great app. A lot of people I know, actually, if they're doing solo gigs, they'll use that as the backing tracks. I do something else, but they'll use that as the backing tracks, and it's fine enough. It's not like, I think Band in a Box, it's more expensive. It's it's obviously better, but iReal Pro is great for practicing. Certainly, it'll help you out with the chord changes and stuff. And do you find, I find the chord changes are fairly accurate. Do you?
Yeah, they are. And then you can edit them if you find them. Sometimes I find a mistake in some of the charts that you get on the forums, that people have contributed. So that's another great thing about it. Like, you can go on a forum and maybe some user has created charts for, a bunch of songs that aren't on there. You can just download them. So if you find a little mistake, you can fix it.
Absolutely. And that's a good aside, and it's a great tip. It's a great app. And again, the desktop app is separate. I think it's around $20. So's the mobile app. That's another $20, but it's certainly a great practice device.
Well worth it. Well worth it. Yeah.
It's almost like Jamie Aebersold on steroids in a sense, because it's, because you could change the tempo. Because I know, I love Jamie Aebersold. I interviewed him for the podcast. Great guy. But one of the things was that the tempos on in the Aebersold books were so fast, and people would just, they couldn't catch up. They couldn't learn from it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great way to sort of incrementally like speed something up. If you're trying to work on playing something fast, you want to start slow and then, really learn the changes and then get to the point where you can play it at a faster tempo. Definitely.
And to compete at the New York gigs. I just said the New York Jam Sessions. I had to put that out there. But yeah, so I was curious because you'd been talking about tenor a lot, but I see you playing alto a lot. So can you talk about, did you transition? Do you still play tenor? I
transitioned. Yeah,
Okay.
well, okay. So, because I just started on tenor, that was what they gave me. I was a tenor player for many, many years. I still play tenor. I love tenor. But when I started really writing my own music, I felt like alto really fit my voice better. Like when I would sing melodies and stuff, I just would hear in alto. And so I used to borrow, there was this alto player that lived in my neighborhood when I first moved to New York. Her name is Sheila Cooper. And she had a spare alto, and I was always borrowing it from her and fooling around on it. And whenever I would, like, I used to have jam sessions at my apartment. I used to live in a place where I could have jam sessions. So
Wow.
the guys I used to play with would say, you know what, you sound really good on alto. That could be your voice. But I was so like, oh no, I'm a tenor player. But then the more I got into alto, I was like, you know what, I really like this. And finally Sheila said, Laura, just buy it from me. I'll sell it to you really cheap. I know you want to do it. Just buy this thing. So Sheila sold me a nice Mark 7 alto, which I still have and I love. It's a great Mark 7. And then when I started, and then I remember I told I was in these club day bands, and I was like, I want to play alto now. And it was so much easier to like stand on stage for 4 hours holding an alto because it's symmetrical. And I used to get really bad back problems from, standing for long periods of time in a twisted position holding a tenor. So alto was like more comfortable for me. And then when I was in Diva, I told Sherry I wanted to play. The lead alto player left, and I said, I'm going to play lead alto. And she said, well, I'm going to, have you audition against a couple other people. And I was like, okay, fine. So I did. And there was like an audition with like Frank West and Mark Vinci and some other, maybe it was Jerry Dodgen or something, this panel, or Tommy Newsom. I think it was Tommy Newsom. I don't know. So we all had to like, play the lead alto part. And so they picked me to play lead alto. And I was like so happy because I don't know, it's just, I always wanted to do that. And so it was kind of for that reason. And then also just for my own music, I just compose and I hear alto. So
That's interesting. And you know what? This is leading me to another question, too, that I should have asked before. When it comes to big band playing, you're the lead alto player. What are some of your responsibilities, thoughts going on? You control the section to a certain extent. So can you talk about playing lead alto in a big band situation?
Sure. Well, I mean, the most obvious and fun reason is I get to control the phrasing, which, for many, many years, I used to go to the Vanguard and hear Mel Lewis, and I was like so enamored of like just the phrasing and just like what you can do as a lead player. Like I used to listen to Dick Oates and Jerry Dodgen and Ted Nash, and I was like, I so want to do that, So when I got the chance to do it with Diva, I already had like a concept in my mind of what I wanted my phrasing to be like. There are a lot of little details that I didn't really know about because they were always done for me as a tenor player. For example, like, telling people when you want the note to end, like if you want it to be off on 3, or being very detailed about the phrasing. There's nothing more annoying as a lead alto player than have people not following your phrasing, and then you sort of have to be a manager and remind them like, hey, I'm articulating it this way and you need to do that too, and without hurting people's feelings or stepping on anyone's toes. Also, making sure that the dynamics are being adhered to, and things like vibrato, or and the other thing you have to do, or at least I had to do in Diva, was cut off the songs at the end. So if there's a fermata, standing up and cutting off the songs, and sometimes conducting a little bit. And so I had a great time. I hope that wasn't my last time playing lead alto. I just
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
it was
so cool.
fun.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's going to be really helpful to the listeners, because I've never actually had the opportunity to ask that kind of question before. And I know it's on people's minds. And actually, when you think about it, if you're a section player, so then, you have to be listening to the lead alto player for all those things you mentioned, the phrasing, the articulation, where to breathe, and dynamics, and all those types of things too. I guess, are there any other tips you would give a section player?
Well, definitely you have to be able to listen to yourself and other people at the same time. Like I was actually sometimes I work with students that want to start playing jazz. I have one right now, and I'm having her play with the Jim Snydero etudes, which I think are really great too.
Yeah.
And she's having a hard time keep staying with him, like she'll get lost and play too fast or too slow. So I was reminding her, like, when you're playing just in a band, you can't not only have to listen to yourself, but you have to listen to other people at the same time. So it's almost like you have to multitask. And so when you're playing in a sax section, you're listening to what you're doing, and you're listening to what the people around you are doing, and you're listening to the lead player, and you're trying to blend with them and making sure you're not playing too loud, but you're supporting enough. And it's definitely like a lot of different things that need to happen in your brain.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so now I'm going to digress again. You started off on flute, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then you went to tenor sax. When did you bring the flute back in? Because you do that.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really practice my flute for a long time. And then when I started really getting into Brazilian music, I saw that that would be a really important voice, a really important instrument for me. And so I started practicing again, and then writing for it. And um, so I was practicing a lot, and I would, get together with people and play duets. And I was using it a lot, but I didn't really have a great flute. And then I met Elcio Milito, and in New York, he was a great Brazilian, quintessential Brazilian percussionist, very iconic. And he had this gig in Monterey at the Inn at Spanish Bay, and he invited me to come out and play with his trio for a couple of months. So I just had like a crappy Yamaha flute. So I went out there, and then he was like not digging the sound. He was like, Laura, you need a French flute. You need a good flute. And then so there was a guy there that had a Haynes, and he let me try that. And he was like, oh, that's so much better. So my mom came to one of the gigs, and she goes, you know what? My grandmother had just passed away, and she goes, I think your grandmother would have wanted you to have a good flute. So she had gotten a little inheritance, and so she gave me money for when I went back to New York to buy a really good flute. So that's kind of how I started playing flute.
That's awesome. And when did you, this is going to lead into two things actually. When did you start composing, but also it's interesting how you started to get really involved with Brazilian music. So maybe we should talk about that first, and then I'm sure the composition is going to be a part of that as well.
It is totally. Well, okay, so I've always been a composer. I've always written tunes and stuff. When I was at Berkeley, I had some harmony classes that really sort of clicked with me and helped me understand harmony and melody and this and that. And I had started studying composition when I moved to New York with Jim McNeely, and I was really attracted to fusion. I was there, I originally went there to play straight ahead jazz, and but I just kind of thought, you know what, it's not really me. I feel more like I like the harmony, I like the creativity of fusion. I mean, not to say fusion, I mean like stuff like Weather Report and Chick Corea Electric Band, and I was like really listening to a lot more stuff like that, and I liked the freedom to like have different rhythms and different forms and different textures and sounds, and I loved Wayne Shorter to death. And so I started composing in that style, and then I had heard Lyle May's record, and that just blew my mind. And so I tracked him down, and I started studying with him, and got really into his music and like Pat Metheny and stuff like that. And at that time, there was a really great radio station in New York called CD 101, and they played all that kind of music, and they also played Brazilian music too. I had played in a Brazilian group when I was in California. Annette Aguilar had a group, and I played in her group. So I had played Latin jazz, I'd played Brazilian jazz, I'd played Latin music, but Brazilian music, just like, I fell in love with it. And so I sort of went from fusion to Brazilian music. And at that time, there was a huge Brazilian scene in New York City. So there were clubs you could go to. And again, I would go sit in. There was this one group, and I would go sit in with them, weekly, sometimes bi-weekly. And they were very welcoming. They were like, just come on by. So again, I started making lists of songs and repertoire, and just tried to learn as much about what the repertoire, like what I could play as an instrumentalist. And then I started trying to compose in that style, and met people to jam with, and that's still sort of my main passion today. That's where my heart is.
This is so interesting, and I'm just thinking to myself too, like with Brazilian music, the rhythms, the groove is so intricate. So yeah, how did you get comfortable? Obviously listening, I would say, but how did you get comfortable even writing, thinking about that, the groove, and being authentic with that?
Well, so I started after I sort of terminated my fusion band. I started a Brazilian group with a drummer named Vanderlei Pereira. He used to play in the little trio I used to go sit in with and stuff. He's blind. He had a little studio, and so I would get together. He liked to, he liked my playing. And so I put together a little band of him, Dario Eskenazi, and Kip Reed. And I would just show up with charts. And Vanderlei was very blunt if something wasn't working. He was like, no, Laura, this goes against the, the clave or whatever. Or they don't really use the term clave that much, but there is sort of a clave in a certain way. Like there's a lot of syncopation. So through him, like giving me feedback, he gave me a lot of feedback on what worked and what didn't work. And then he also invited me to come to the Drummers Collective where he was teaching percussion classes. So I sort of started studying the different percussion instruments. And he really helped me a lot at the beginning,
That's really a great tip, actually, because the question I have in my head, and this will help the listeners too, Latin music, Brazilian music, similarities, differences, and just the fact that you attended and started to study the percussion instruments, I mean, that is really brilliant because you need to understand the groove, the rhythms for that. But can you talk about Latin music, Brazilian music, like similarities, differences, and that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess the similarity is in Central America, South America, because of the influence of the West Africans, in the slave trade, most of those styles were sort of evolved out of African rhythms from West Africa. So the difference between the United States and in South America and Central America is in the United States, they did not allow their slaves to play drums. And in Brazil, they did. The drums were allowed. And so for that reason, like, Cuba, Brazil, Bolivia, I guess. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm like, but anyway, through the influence of the European settlers who brought their own music, like for Brazil, it would be like the Portuguese, and I guess in Cuba it would be more Spanish, and so they all come from the same sort of mix of European music and African music, and I think they, because they were sort of separated from each other, different influences became more prominent, and the different styles kind of evolved in their different locations. So they didn't really get to interact that much like maybe one would today. And so definitely, and even within like just Brazilian music is just such a vast topic. Within Brazilian music, there are categories and subcategories and different regions, and within those different regions there are little minutia and micro categories and stuff. So I mean, me myself, I like Brazilian jazz. And as a saxophone player and a jazz improviser, that seems to be the best fit. But there's so much more, and there's so much more that I don't know about, even, in that music. But definitely, like, when you first, like, going to Berkeley and looking at a real book and looking at a song, it'll just say Latin. It doesn't say, like, exactly what the feel is. And when I first started pointing that out to people, they thought I was a huge snob, like people would get angry and they were like, God, Laura, you're such a snob. Why don't you just like get off your high horse? And, I'm like, no, I mean, this is a samba. This is not a montuno, so.
There's a big difference. And that's the thing too. Like you mentioned briefly about with the drummer saying this is not really, you're not following the clave, but they don't really say clave as much. And that's what sparked this question because clave is huge, but again, I'm not as informed on this style of music too. So, clave is a big part of Latin music, and it's different. There are different types of clave.
Right.
So, that's what inspired this question. And in terms of, Brazilian music, you have the different grooves there as well, and it's really, really intricate.
Yeah, very much. And you do have to pay attention to the rhythm more than, like, I find that a lot of jazz players are very loose sometimes. You can lay back a lot, and that sounds great. I mean, there's a lot of like flexibility within that. There is flexibility when you're playing Brazilian music too, but you really have to put the rhythm first and foremost. You know, you can't lay back, you can't play behind the beat. You have to play, you know, in that groove to, you know, otherwise the rhythm section is going to kill you, you know.
I can imagine everything has to be in the pocket. It's got to be tight.
Totally, it's in the pocket.
You know, it's interesting because when I think about it, you were into fusion for a while. You've got to be in the pocket, you know, with that too in a certain respect.
Sure.
Because there is that groove, and that's probably why, you know, Brazilian music is really resonating for you because it's the same overall concept, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, when you're playing, I mean, fusion is a very wide definition too. I mean, there's so many different fields that can fall within fusion. You know, different styles of funk, different styles of rock fusion. You know, different meters. I mean, it's many different things. But yeah, it is more based on the rhythm and the groove.
Cool. So now, in terms of your own composition, what what is your process? Like, do you start by singing out a melody? Do you feel a groove first? Like, what's your process?
Okay, so I mean, I studied with Lyle Mays for 6 years, and so I kind of he taught me a process which I've kind of just adopted, and that's kind of where I start. So what he had me do was think of a seed idea and like make a, you know, like just start writing seed ideas, like maybe 2 bars long, maybe 4 bars long, not developing them, just, you know, make a bunch of seed ideas until you find one that you really like. And then you can take that seed idea and let's say you would develop it in several different ways, or maybe do pages and pages of different ways to develop that idea, still not committing to anything, and then maybe sleeping on it. And then what I find is sometimes when I start doing that, like entire songs will just come to me in my head now, you know, but it's not when I'm sitting at the piano. It's like when I'm in the shower or running or something like that. So I try to remember as much as I can. And then the hardest part is kind of taking those seed ideas and deciding what direction to take them. You know, I mean, sometimes I'll think to myself, I want to write a bossa nova, so I'm going to start with that, you know, and that works too. But definitely the seed idea thing, and not committing too quickly to the song before you've really explored all the possibilities, and then going back and then editing it and sleeping on it. And sometimes it can get so frustrating because you just think, I'll never finish this. This is just a waste of time. But then you got to stick with it. And then usually I'll be able to come up with a finished product. And I'll edit it too. Like I have stuff I wrote 20 years ago that I'll come back and I'll fix up and maybe change around and stuff. So I try not, the hardest part is to not get frustrated and start feeling self-critical and kind of, you know, because I mean, it's really easy to sit down and write something all in, you know, a half an hour, but did you really like explore all the ideas? Did you really develop it into something, you know, like a really solid piece, or is it just going to be another sort of mediocre tune? So, you know.
You know, this is interesting too, because my question that I'm thinking about is that this composition process is really, again, like Brazilian music, it's intricate, it's more demanding, maybe more involved than if you're writing the head of, like, let's say a straight ahead jazz tune, right? Because there's a lot more freedom in straight ahead jazz, or even contemporary jazz to a certain extent. But I'm thinking you have to, how much freedom is, you know, for the artists that are playing Brazilian music, how much freedom is there in terms of the composition itself?
Well, like I said, I mean, that's a good question. You definitely have to, or I feel like you need to compose melodies that have Brazilian rhythms in the melodies, like syncopated melodies, melodies that fall in the pocket of the particular rhythm that you're writing for. So like with Brazilian music, I guess instead of just letting the thing become what it is, which is what I used to do more with fusion, I'll start with more of an idea, like, okay, this is going to be a samba, this is going to be a baião, this is going to be an afoxé, you know. And then if I start thinking with that rhythm in mind, then that sort of informs the way the harmony and the melody and the form will develop.
Got it. And you know, I'm thinking to myself, for those listeners out there that are really intrigued by this and want to learn more about Brazilian music, what would you recommend? And I know you do speak at schools, you do speak at colleges and all that kind of thing, but what would you recommend?
Um, well, definitely just listen as much as possible. If you're on Facebook, there are so many groups that specialize in the sharing of Brazilian music. You can join those groups and start listening to what people are posting on there. And those are great resources. Um, Go if you see live Brazilian music playing, some artists playing in your city, obviously after the coronavirus has ended and stuff. There's just so much on YouTube. I mean, um, so much. There's so much. There's almost too much. You know.
Right, right. No, that's true. YouTube is the black hole of everything. And well, let me ask you this question: Who, if you can give a recommendation, like you know, who do you like to listen to, and that would give some people a start. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, obviously you have to listen to Jobim.
Yeah.
No question. And you know, he, in my opinion, was one of the greatest composers of the 20th century. I mean, just continually blows me away. But then, so for Brazilian jazz, there's João Donato, there's Dom Salvador, there's why am I? My mind is drawing a blank. Gilberto Gil, Chico Buarque, Ayrton and Flora, Ivan Lins. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, I think I made a list once. I can send it to you if you want, you know, post it.
Oh,
Because when I do workshop, I mean, it helps me to just, sometimes like somebody asks me in the moment and I'm like, oh.
I'm going to write a note right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. A list
João
of,
Bosco, yeah, you know, there's so many.
because I wouldn't be able to spell those out. So I'm thinking.
Yeah. I'll send you a list. I'll send you my list.
That would be awesome. And what we'll do, folks, is we'll put this in the show notes for this podcast on saxophonepodcast.com, the website. That's awesome. I just realized, wow, you've been so generous with your time. But I have to get into you, though, before I let you go. So what have some recent projects that you've done, and do you have any upcoming projects after the virus?
Well, yeah. What I like to book. So I go. I can't talk. I had been going out to the Bay Area a lot and booking gigs with Marco Silva. He's a great Brazilian pianist. He's another person, great composer. Marco Silva lives in the Bay Area. He teaches at the Jazz Conservatory out there. You can actually get a degree in Brazilian jazz. You can get a bachelor's degree in Brazilian jazz from the California Jazz Conservatory. So I book gigs with him and his rhythm section and play in a lot of different venues there, house concerts, and I played at the Blue Note Napa last year, and I have a band here in New York that I play at different venues. It's kind of hard to book Brazilian jazz, original Brazilian jazz in New York City because it is very straight ahead jazz oriented, but there are a few places like the Jazz Forum that I play regularly, and I also work with Dom Salvador in his sextet, so we had a bunch of gigs before the pandemic happened, and in terms of like plans for the future, like I'd love to do another album. I don't know whether I would. I plan on getting more into music production on my own because I am still in my apartment, and so I'd like to do a live album, but I'm thinking maybe if I can't do a live album, I'll do something where the players would record individually and see how that goes. I got really into video editing several years ago, and I worked professionally as a video editor from time to time. I'd love to produce another video, a video with my own music, and I don't know. I mean, all these things. It's really hard to say what direction the world's going to go in now, but hopefully I'd love to get back to performing live and touring and traveling and maybe play more places with my band. Actually bring my band from New York to other places. I'd love to do that.
Oh,
So,
that's awesome.
and I also give workshops. I have a workshop called Brazilian Rhythms for Jazz Musicians. So I presented that at several universities, and it's a very successful clinic in that it does sort of emphasize the putting the rhythm first way of improvising, which is I think is helpful for a lot of people.
Absolutely, and you know that's a really great idea, and you know great age, you know, for students to learn that. And have you also presented in high schools too?
Not so much. I teach in high schools and stuff. I actually have sort of a pared down version of that that's not really so much about Brazilian rhythms because those can tend to be a little bit tricky, but just rhythms in general that I've used with high school students and middle school students.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great because, you know, I know one of the biggest pain points for people is, you know, they feel like their solos aren't rhythmic enough, and that, you know, sounds like a great resource. It really does.
It's also, it can also be helpful for people that don't know what to play. They're, when they're improvising, if you start with a rhythm first, it almost gives you like a nice comfortable thing where, you don't have to worry about like playing a million notes. You can just play an idea that's based more on rhythm.
Definitely. That is great. That is fantastic advice right there. And I think that's great. It doesn't even matter, you know, whatever level you're at because, you know,
Totally.
obviously, yeah, the more advanced you are, you're going to be coming up with more intricate rhythms, but still, I think that's great advice. Now, what about in terms of your previous albums? Where can you name some of them for everybody here, and where can people get them?
Well, you can go to my website, lauradreyer.com. That's Dreyer. And there is a page that gives links to all of my albums. My first album was called Mysterious Encounter. That was my first Brazilian jazz album with the band that I mentioned that I started my foray into Brazilian jazz with. I did a compilation album where I used compositions of 11 different female jazz artists, and I made a compilation album called Sax in the City that I wanted to donate the proceeds to breast cancer charities.
Wow.
So, and then I did an album called Free Flying Bird, which is sort of a Brazilian, but also kind of a fusiony, straight ahead thing. And then my most recent album is called Vida, Arte, Amor, and that was recorded in Brazil, and it was released in 2014. And yeah, I used a really great Brazilian band in Rio. So
Wow, that's really cool. That's awesome. And on your website, so people can find it, they could buy it. Are they able to sample, or are they able to hear a little bit from the albums?
um, I have some sound bites on there, but I think, some of them are on CD Baby, so they have little samples you can. It's on iTunes too, obviously, so you can just go on iTunes and listen to samples there.
Right. Awesome. That's so cool. Well, listen, Laura, I wanted to thank you for being so generous with your time.
Sure.
There's so many great things that you shared, so many great, you know, tips, advice. And like I said before, I never had the opportunity to ask like questions regarding big bands, but certainly with regarding, you know, Brazilian music, Brazilian jazz. I thought that was really, really intriguing and interesting for the listeners.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Donna. Thank you for having me. It's really fun talking to you, and glad to share my story.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that I ran into you at NAM this past year,
Yeah.
and you know we were able to make the connection. Thanks again, Laura.
Sure. Thank